Many thanks for your company here on Joy News Desk. Now, the Council of State is outdated and a drain on the taxpayer and national purse. That's the view of a junior partner at Kulendi at Law, Daniel Sego Osei. Now, Daniel Osei spoke at the 5th edition of Joy FM Thought Leadership Debate on the relevance of the institution. Earlier, a senior partner at the law firm Bentil Enchil Letsa and Nkoma had lauded efforts of the council and had asked for reforms to make it more effective. But a lawyer said those arguments put forth by Mr. Bentil Enchil were only idealistic.
I speak for the motion that it should be abolished, and in my opening submission said that it is just a duplication of functions already being performed by other state institutions.
You mentioned the Attorney General,
the principal legal advisor, and then I mentioned cabinet as well. Yes. So, per the Constitution and all of the consultation that is meant to be done with the with the Council of State, there are already analogous provisions that more or less deal with this situation. So if you are meant to appoint in consultation with the Council of State, which is a separate body that we set up and remunerate, and you still have your cabinet, even when we go to the ministries, we have the directors who can then advise government on this institutional arrangements, the governance of each ministry. We have ministers, we have deputies, even the government is allowed, president can appoint more than one deputy. It is a duplication which we can do away with, and nonetheless the tenets of our democracy will still be respected. I will conclude briefly, and then in doing so make a reference to value for money once more. A country with our budget deficit, can we afford to continue to maintain a Council of State whose, again, opinions, decisions, recommendations are not binding on the president, and whether or not they even meet to deliberate is still a matter that we are not too sure, even though Google is of the opinion that they do. Commencing 2016, the members of the Council of State each was drawing a salary of about 12,000.
Meanwhile, the chairman of the committee of experts that formulated the proposals for the 1992 Constitution, Professor S.K.B. Asante, has also called for reforms that will allow the Council of State function as a second chamber, while at the same time curb the instance of the winner-take-all politics.
But we have to go back to the Kuzi Commission's proposals. The idea of a second chamber was considered very fully by the Kuzi Committee. However, the political class rejected that on grounds of expense, or maybe on grounds of political jealousy. The idea of a second chamber has come up over and over again, and excuses have been found to shoot the proposal down.
Apologies for the low quality and sound. And now let's get more on this. I'm joined on the line now by lawyer Dr. Abdul Basit. He is a constitutional law lawyer at the School of Law, University of Ghana. Good morning, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. First, what is your take on the argument that a Council of State as an entity should be scrapped?
Well, good morning to your viewers and to your listeners, and thanks for asking of my views on this matter. The first point that needs to be made is that before we consider the usefulness of the Council of State, it is important we look at it from an historical context. The first time that we had a Council of State was in the 1969 Constitution. And the experts who drafted the 1969 Constitution were very, very clear about the purpose or the usefulness of the Council of State. The Council of State was primarily established to offer advice to the President, and I want to emphasize the word advice, to offer advice to the President. Now, in the words of the experts who originated the concept of the Council of State, the council was meant to counsel, warn, encourage, and arbitrate political disputes such that we have compromise and moderation in our body politic. So right from its inception and conceptualization, the Council of State has never been intended to be giving binding legal advice to the president. That was not the intent of the Council of State, and that has never been the intent. And I think it is important that this current debate is looked at within that context. Remember that we have an executive presidency, where the president is the executive authority of the country and has executive powers with all its breadth and depth. So you cannot have a situation where a Council of State that is primarily designed to be an advisory body basically curtailing the powers of the president in terms of what the president can do. But that does not mean that they don't serve any usefulness. Now, the Council of State, remember, by the Constitution, can come out with a number of committees to aid it in its work. Now, that committee may include a legal committee that can give legal advice to the president. It can even include a political committee that gives political advice to the president on certain matters of governance. And what's important is that the various pieces of advice of the Council of State are considered by the president, and then based upon his view of the quality of the advice, he either goes by them or decides to do something differently.
And so
I think this whole debate about scrapping the Council of State is quite inconsistent with the policy rationale for setting up the Council of State.
Well, so the argument is that the initial idea was that the Council of State will serve as a buffer institution between the Prime Minister and the President. And we know that in Ghana, we don't have that system of governance. And so for those who are calling for it to be scrapped, that's one of the arguments they raise. Another argument they raise is about the fact that other institutions or the Cabinet and the Attorney General can't do the work of the Council of State. So really, it's just a duplication of jobs.
No, I disagree with that. I accept the position that there are other institutions that can do similar jobs as that's performed by the Council of State. But I entirely disagree with the view that the work of the Council of State should be done by, let's say, the Attorney General. Now, remember that the Council of State is one of the few institutions or bodies that we have in the Constitution that has a varied membership. The membership of the Council of State comprises people with political experience who have occupied high positions in the country. You have a former IGP should be on the Council of State, Chief Justice, Chief of Defense Staff, the President of the National House of Chiefs. So the idea about the composition of the Council of State is to present the President with a broad range of advice that you can never get in one institution. So the office of the Attorney General can never give that broad scope of advice that you can expect from the Council of State. And this has been done for a good reason. So I think that this whole debate about the Council of State being scrapped is actually alien, to the policy rationale for setting up the Council of State. What needs to be done? It is true that the Council has come under criticisms of late. You remember in the 90s, some were so unfair, as you even call it, the errand boys and girls of the president. Those unsavory comments and so on and so forth. I think what needs to be done is that we need to streamline the processes of the Council of State, how they do things.
All right.
Let us take more interest in the way Council of State conducts its business. For example, under the Constitution, the Council of State proceedings could be open to members of the public, even though they can also hold some proceedings in camera. How many of us have you ever, persuaded the Council of State to make its proceedings open to the public so we know what they do?
All right, Doc. So you're for the call that the Council of State should be reformed, or the whole function of it should be looked at. But let's take the instance that we need to scrap the Council of State. How can that be done? Is it legal? Is it possible?
No, if you want to scrap the Council of State, unfortunately, it's not a very simple process. Now, the Council of State, that's Article, I think it's 9 of the Constitution, it's not an entrenched provision. So essentially what you do is that, so a bill has to be drafted, when the bill is drafted, it has to be published in the Gazette, introduced in Parliament, published in the Gazette. When it gets back to Parliament for consideration, about 2/3 of members of Parliament should vote for it. And when it is voted for, the President has a legal duty to assent to the bill for it to become law. Now, the difficulty, however, is that there are aspects of the work of the Council of State that fall under entrenched provisions of the Constitution. So when you take Article 70, for instance, the President is to appoint the Commissioner of STRA, the Deputy Commissioners, the Auditor General, in consultation with the Council of State. Again, the President is to appoint the Electoral Commissioner and each of her deputies in accordance with the advice of the Council of State. Now, these provisions are entrenched provisions, so which means that if you want to amend the provision on the Council of State, equally you have to amend the provisions on this amendment process. But those are entrenched provisions, so that then leads to the question whether for those provisions you need to apply the process for amending the entrenched provisions of the Constitution. And that becomes a bit complicated.
Right, Doc, and so what do you think is the way forward, really, in terms of the argument on whether the Council of State is really necessary in our system of governance as it is now?
Well, actually, for me, the way forward is not about scrapping the Council of State. The way forward is ensuring that the Council of State's work is streamlined. The Council of State becomes a bit more visible in the way it does its work. For example, we have this current debate about allegations in Parliament and what have you. By the constitutional design, this is an area that the Council of State can intervene.
But the Council of State has not yet been formed. We know that nominations ended sometime last week, so really they cannot comment on this.
No, I agree with you. I mean, the elections are yet to be held and what have you. So we may have to wait for the original reps of the Council of State for their election to take place. But remember that the appointment of members of the Council of State is done differently. There are certain persons who can be appointed even without elections being held. But the point I'm trying to make is that by our constitutional design, any constitutional organ or body can make recourse to the assistance and expertise and competence of the Council of State to resolve any issue, and that includes Parliament. So if Parliament feels that for public confidence in this whole process, an institution like Council of State can come in, why not? You can wait when Council of State is really constituted for the necessary investigation to be done. But I mean, to make my final point on this matter, I don't think the Council of State should be scrapped because its advice is not binding on the President. That wasn't the intent for creating the Council of State. And I think the policy rationale for creating the Council of State is still valid, and we should keep Council of State as it is, but just that we must try to streamline the way it conducts its affairs.
Thank you very much for your time. Dr. Abdul Basit is a law lecturer with the University of Ghana Law School. Away from that, still to come, Lands and Forestry Minister-designate Peter Amewu, Employment Minister-designate Ignatius Bafo-Ewa, and Works and Housing Minister-designate Samuel Atachi are next to appear before Parliament's Appointment Committee today to be vetted. 3 nominees, that is the Regional Reorganization and Development Minister-designate Dan Kweku-Botre, Monitoring and Evaluation Minister-designate Anthony Akotose, and Gender Minister-designate Otiko Afisa Jaba, appeared before the committee yesterday. In all, 16 appointees have successfully gone through the vetting process. We'll soon take you live to the conference room of Parliament for today's proceedings at the committee. Please stay with us.